We've been focused on the candidates for mayor in Jacksonville, but the upcoming votes will stretch across a dozen elected offices. Our Hand on Government segment will dive into the details of the other important races, including property appraisal. We're also looking at voting rights and enforcement of election law.
It's a broken system, and they're just not addressing the fundamental problem here.
The state leader of a nonpartisan voters group explains the hopes for adjustments and education on This Week in Jacksonville. So glad you're here today, the final Sunday of February, and our focus on local politics. Government law attorney Chris Hand is joining us for our monthly Hand on Government segment. We often talk about state issues and federal issues. We're going to focus exclusively on what's happening locally. This is interesting, Chris, because Jacksonville is different than other communities in terms of when the elections are and how they're held, right?
Well, that's exactly right. We use what's called a unitary system here in Jacksonville, Kent, where all the candidates for City of Jacksonville office run on the same ballot regardless of party affiliation, and if no one receives a majority in that particular election on March 21st, the top two finishers will move on to the May 16th second election.
So how unusual is it to stagger municipal elections versus when the statewide elections were, you know, in 2022, we're voting on governor and state reps, all that kind of thing. Here it is in an odd year, not an even year, that we're doing the local elections.
Well, here in the state of Florida, it's actually quite common. Most of the big cities, Orlando, Tampa, others have their elections in what is known as the off year, kind of these odd-numbered years. And the thinking behind that, Kent, is that it gives voters in those communities a chance to focus exclusively on these contests for local government, which is important. Local government's the level of government that has the most direct and significant impact on our daily lives. And so the theory behind that timing is allow voters to focus exclusively on these local government elections without having that kind of caught up in the mix of whether it's a governor's election or a presidential election as well.
So we've done lots of coverage on the mayoral race, 7 qualified candidates at a ballot, another qualified write-in candidate. You've heard from each of them here on our show, and we're going to do a televised debate Wednesday, March 8th. So that race kind of top of the ticket. There are other important races too. Maybe explain some of that for us.
Well, obviously the mayor's race, because we have a strong mayor system in this consolidated city-county here at the City of Jacksonville, invariably gets the biggest amount of attention in these local election contests. But there are many important electoral contests that are going to be on the ballot on March the 21st. Of course, starting with the Jacksonville City Council. As we all know, we have a 19-person city council here at the City of Jacksonville. 14 of those seats are district or neighborhood seats, and 5 are at large. People elect, those people who in those seats are elected from the county as a whole. Well, 15 of those 19 seats are going to be on the March 21st ballot, and they're very important. Former Mayor Jake Godbold used to say that no mayor can get anything done without 10 votes. That if a mayor wants to move his or her agenda forward, you've got to have council support. And there are certain crucial tasks that a council is exclusively responsible for. Passing a budget, and now the City of Jacksonville budget is more than $1.5 billion. Or setting the annual millage or property tax rate. Those are exclusively council functions, and there are others as well. So these city council elections are very important. And of course, in many cases, that is a citizen's first kind of avenue to access and engage the City of Jacksonville, either their district or at-large city council person. So those are very important elections coming up on March 21st.
Very early in my time here in Jacksonville as the political reporter for this TV station, went to talk to a civic group. Hey, we want to know about the upcoming elections. And it was interesting to me because several of them said, yeah, about the mayor. We know who's running for mayor. Talk to us more about the city council races. One of the questions I think people have is, boy, there are 19 city council offices. So help folks understand maybe how to boil it down when it comes to the relationship between city council and their representative in city council and the mayor's office who are governing this incredible Duval County, right?
Sure. Well, the mayor, of course, is the chief executive of the City of Jacksonville, responsible for the day-to-day running of city government. City Council is the policy-making body, which sort of has the power to change the City of Jacksonville charter in some cases, the City of Jacksonville Ordinance Code. Again, sets that foundation on which governing occurs at the City of Jacksonville. And as I said earlier, has that important work like passing the annual budget and setting the millage rate. So it's a co-equal branch of government with the mayor of Jacksonville. And so it really matters who gets elected to these 19 council seats each year. And of course, this isn't purely hypothetical right now, Kent. People are already voting in this March 21st election. Ballots have already gone out by mail. Early voting starts on March the 7th. So this is all happening as we speak, both for the mayor's race and for these important city council races.
So definitely, and in our next segment, we're going to talk much more about some of the specific city council races. For as much as we can right here, though, let's talk about roles and responsibility and candidates on some other offices. And I guess let's start with property appraiser. I want to show you there are three candidates that is on the ballot for Duval County property appraiser. One of them, Joyce Morgan. She's been on city council for 2 terms. Also, city councilman Danny Beckton, a Republican. He also is finishing his 2nd term here. And then Republican Jason Fisher, former state representative, also a former Duval County Schools board member. Explain to people why this race should be on their radar and they should really focus on.
Well, for a number of reasons, including the fact that it's the only one of the Duval County constitutional offices that actually has a contested election in 2023. We also elect a supervisor of elections. We did that because Jerry Holland was the only candidate running. He was elected unopposed. There's a Duval County tax collector. Jim Overton was reelected to that position unopposed. There's a sheriff. T.K. Waters reelected to that position unopposed. So property appraiser is the sole constitutional office that has a contested election in 2023. And it's very important. If you own property here in Duval County, the office responsible for setting the value of that property for tax purposes, and that helps to decide the size of either your residential property tax bill or your commercial property tax bill, that's the property appraiser that does that work. So it's an office that can have a very significant impact on the lives of people who live here in Jacksonville, Duval County, and an important election that voters would be wise to pay attention to because, again, just like with city council, it matters who gets elected to that position.
So, Chris, and maybe we'll wrap up here before we go to commercial break, but if I know now the importance of that role, how to decide who's best at it? Who should I select? How do you determine that?
Well, I think it's very important, as with any electoral contest, to really study in this case, 3 candidates for office, kind of understand what their priorities and their plans are, and for citizens to directly engage those candidates and find out how they plan to run the office of property appraiser for the next 4 years. And of course, all of us have that ability, whether that's attending forums where candidates are present. Every campaign's email is listed on the Duval Supervisor of Elections website, sending questions that way. So I always think with every contest, and including the property appraiser, directly engage the candidates. Use your powers of effective citizenship to make sure they respond to your questions about the office, their qualifications for the office, and their plans and priorities for leading that office.
And it's interesting because many of them will respond directly to you. Okay, don't go anywhere. Our Hand on Government segment continues when we come back on This Week in Jacksonville. And if you're only joining me Sundays for This Week in Jacksonville, you're missing out. We want to remind you, be sure to subscribe to my weekly Twidge newsletter. It's a real bonus for News4Jax insiders. You head to news4jax.com/newsletters and then click to sign up under This Week in Jacksonville. We'll be right back.
What's the Highlander life? It's giving your daughter 5 friendly reminders to brush her teeth this morning. And though she assured you she did, something in the air says she didn't. But it's nothing a little adjustment can't help.
Okay, perfect. Okay, bye, baby doll. Bye-bye.
That's the Highlander life. Right now, lease a new 2023 Toyota Highlander LE for just $409 a month for 36 months. Toyota, let's go places.
Big government Al Ferraro and liberal Leanna Cumber teamed up on the city council, pushing policies that hurt Jacksonville families, but help their cronies. Under Ferraro and Cumber, the city budget exploded with hundreds of millions in new spending and borrowing. While inflation skyrocketed, they took money from lobbyists and developers, then voted to give them your tax dollars. Al Ferraro and Leanna Cumber, 2 liberals taking care of their special interests, not us.
Yep, we've got you covered. Sell, buy home loans, OfferPad can help you do it all. In fact, we can bundle everything for you. Sell this home, buy your next, and include a home loan. You could save thousands.
Can you tell our son he needs to find his own place?
You made me. I am your son. Do you even love me anymore? Who's going to make me breakfast?
No matter what your real estate need is, OfferPad can help you with literally almost everything. OfferPad, your all-in-one way to sell, buy, mortgage a home.
If you're hurt and have no car, we'll help you seek a rental from the insurance company. And we'll do it for no extra fee. Call Farah and Farah.
Gonna have a good time.
All right, come on with us.
River City Live, weekdays at 11.
Registration is now open for the 2023 Gate River Run.
Whoa, 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 no, 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 no,
no! Don't worry. You may feel everything, but your Subaru's value won't. The Subaru Outback has the best resale value in its class.
Check, please.
Next ET, we're with Tom Cruise gearing up for Maverick's Oscar close-up.
I just can't believe this moment's here.
And kicking it with the Queens at the NAACP Image Awards. Next ET.
Monday at 7 on Channel 4, the local station.
Is this the future for treating ADHD, anxiety, and depression? News 4 Jax reveals the little-known treatments.
I feel like melting.
Electrotherapies. Monday, starting at 5 on News 4 Jax.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
Our Hand on Government segment continues now with Chris Hand, former Chief of Staff for the City of Jacksonville between 2011 and 2015. Chris, so we're focusing on local government. We've been talking about the candidates on the ballot. And again, elections are starting right now because people are able to vote here. Let's talk specifically on City Council here. There are races in 3 at-large group seats and then campaigns for the office in 13 districts. Let me show you this graphic, though. There are a few unopposed council members. These council members, these seats are already decided. Kevin Carrico beginning a full term this summer. He was initially chosen in a special election back in 2020 to finish the term of Scott Wilson. Carrico representing District 4. And then 2 at-large seats, they're taken. Nick Howland, Group 3, starting a full term. He won a special election to replace the late Tommy Hazuri a year ago. And then Matt Carlucci, he's got at-large Group 4. This is interesting. This is his 3rd stint on council, previously serving 87 to 94, 99 to 2003, and now since 2019. So these other districts that we're looking at, or these other seats, including the at-large seats, which ones are you going to focus on? Which ones have your attention as we go into our March election? Because it seems like some of them will go to a runoff in May as well.
Well, Ken, remember, what the actual city council district map looked like wasn't certain until really just a few days before qualifying because of a lawsuit that was filed against the city council's redistricting process. Ultimately, it was the federal court here in Jacksonville that actually imposed a map to kind of govern the 2023 elections. So some of these districts are literally brand new. And so I think there are several that are going to be particularly impactful on this first ballot, March 21st, before that second ballot on May 16th. Council District 1, which Councilwoman Joyce Morgan is vacating to run for property appraiser and because she's term limited. Ken Amaro, who's a former local television reporter, is running in that seat. That's going to be one to watch as well. District 5, you mentioned earlier Matt Carlucci and being a re-elected opposition. He's not the only Carlucci running for office in 2023. In District 5, which is San Marco and St. Nicholas and San Jose, his son Joe Carlucci is running for that district seat against an opponent there. And also one of the new districts, and the opponent Morgan Roberts in that District 5 seat. And one of the new seats is District 7. This is a newly drawn seat that covers a variety of neighborhoods. Goes from Avondale, Riverside, and even includes Springfield. There are multiple candidates running there, but it's a brand new seat. It'll go until May, but a very interesting election because of the eclectic nature of different neighborhoods that it covers. And of course, a couple of at-large seats as well. We talked earlier that there are certain seats that cover the entire county, but the candidates have to live in certain areas. At-large Group 2, Ron Salem, who's the current council vice president, slated to become the new council president next year. He's being challenged in at-large Group 2 by Joshua Hicks. And then at-large Group 5 is an open seat that has multiple candidates running for that. So I think those will be some of the elections that people watch most closely on March 21st for one of a variety of reasons. In candidates that have, in campaigns that have multiple candidates running, Kent, those are much more likely to go on to May 16th because, again, if no one receives 50% of the vote plus one on March 21st, then they advance to a second election on May 16th.
A couple of questions come up. You mentioned that District 5, I believe, with Joe Carlucci. I've heard some complaints, hey, there needs to be something to explain that when I see Carlucci on the ballot, I'm not thinking it's Matt Carlucci. Is that confusing for people, or is there something, a different way to approach that from the supervisor of elections?
Well, I mean, again, he does have a different name. It's Joe Carlucci. Right. It's not Matt Carlucci running for that. And that's been a very spirited campaign between Joe Carlucci and Morgan Roberts for that District 5 seat, where both candidates have raised about the same amount of money. Both have been very active in both their paid media. So I think voters in that district are getting a lot of information from both of the candidates. And, you know, in those district seats, I think it is often much more possible that voters have a personal relationship with the candidates running. So it seems unlikely there's going to be a ton of confusion. It is a different Carlucci running, and people can see that from the paid media, can see that in all the different interactions the candidates are having in that two-person race that will be decided on March the 21st.
The other question I ask you, we've got about a minute left, is you mentioned at-large groups. So the at-large member represents everybody, but no, they've got to live in a certain pocket of Duval County.
Well, that's right. So they do represent the entire county. So everyone in Duval County in Jacksonville has actually 6 direct representatives on the city council. Their district member and the 5 at-large members who represent you. But the way it's provided for in the City of Jacksonville charter, even though you represent the entire county, you have to live in a particular residential area to run for one of these 5 at-large seats. Each one has a different residential area. But once they get elected, their constituency is not just one neighborhood, it's the entire city of Jacksonville.
Yeah, and we didn't go in detail on each of these candidates. There's so many candidates we couldn't do that in this time, but we do have our voter guide on news4jax.com, so you'll definitely want to check that out. And Chris Hand, I know these next few weeks we'll be talking some more about what's going on here. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.
So we're going to talk elections from a little different viewpoint in just a moment. My conversation with the statewide leader of a group called All Voting is Local. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
For adventure, for climbing, for splashing, for towing, for premium, for capable. The GMC AT4 lineup, premium and capable. That's professional grade from GMC. Or get 2.9% APR and no monthly payments for 90 days on turbo high output engine Sierra light duty models.
I came to Harold & Harold because I wanted to get my mom some form of respect and some form of dignity with everything that had gone on with her. And Julie put me at ease right away to let me know that she was going to take care of me and my family, and that she was going to get my mom the respect and the dignity that we were looking to get her that she didn't get at the facility she was at. If I had any fears, they always addressed those, and that allowed me the time to grieve with my family and go through that whole process, and I didn't have to worry about the case itself.
Harold & Harold, don't settle for less than you deserve.
Do you feel uneasy, irritable? Does your Xfinity bill make you anxious? You may be suffering from UPH, unexpected price hikes. It happened to me. And then I switched to T-Mobile and got 5G home internet for just $50 a month. Now I'm sleeping better, my skin is glowing, and my hair has never been so shiny. Most importantly, T-Mobile has price lock guarantee. They will never raise your internet rate, ever. Switch to T-Mobile home internet. It worked for me. And just look at that shine. Wait, what has the internet got to do with my hair?
Property appraiser candidate Jason Fisher is ready to serve us and is endorsed by Governor Ron DeSantis. In the legislature, Fisher worked with Governor DeSantis to cut waste, crack down on illegal immigration, and support our first responders. That's why Sheriff T.K. Waters and the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed him. Fisher will lead with integrity and use his experience to streamline government, improve efficiency, and keep our taxes low. Jason Fisher, DeSantis endorsed, ready to lead.
No, I got this.
Let me help you with that.
I'm good, man. Thanks.
Are you sure?
I got it. Oh, I'm okay.
You want to flip those over, though.
Everyone can use a little help now and then. The Volkswagen Tiguan with standard front assist. Visit your Volkswagen dealer this President's Day and get 3.9% APR for 72 months on most new 2023 SUVs.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
I spoke this week with Brad Ashwell. He's the Florida State Director for All Voting is Local. Now, I reached out to the nonprofit in response to Governor Ron DeSantis signing SB 4B into law. It expands the jurisdiction of the statewide prosecutor over Florida's Office of Election Crimes and Security.
I've been working in these issues for about 20 years, but All Voting is Local has been around for about 5 years, and it was born out of the need to have a group that works year-round on monitoring the elections process at the local and state level to identify any barriers to voters, particularly voters who are historically disenfranchised or historically face different barriers, systemic barriers. So we spent a lot of time working with supervisors of elections at the county level. And during the session, we're up here in the Capitol, just trying to make sure whatever passes out is going to work to voters' benefit as much as possible.
Brad, I reached out because you and your office released a statement after the governor signed Senate Bill 4B into law. So this expands the jurisdiction of the statewide prosecutor over Florida's Office of Election Crimes and Security. How do you feel about that? And then let's talk some more of the details.
Well, we really feel like it's moving the state in the opposite direction it needs to be going in. It's giving the statewide prosecutor more power to prosecute voters who they feel have voted illegally at a time where the state is giving them information that leads them to believe they can vote. So, we'd rather see the state move towards making sure voters have the tools and resources and the ability to determine their eligibility before they vote, before they get into trouble, so they don't get into trouble, rather than adding, another proposal that's out there this session is the idea of expanding what's called the Office of Election Crimes and Security, dramatically. And, it's hard to talk about the expansion of the statewide prosecutor without talking about the Office of Election Crimes, which is often referred to as the election police, because a lot of the Office of Election Crimes arrested about 20 people right before the August primary last year. And most of those cases that have been heard in court have been thrown out largely because the statewide prosecutor was trying to prosecute them and they didn't have jurisdiction. So, that's really why this is happening. The Office of Election Crimes is arresting people. It's going to court. Judges are saying the statewide prosecutor doesn't have jurisdiction. And now the state and the legislature are trying to work around that.
This Office of Election Crimes, this goes to the Secretary of State's office, if I understand that correctly, right?
That's right.
So just really in the last year that has started, or last year and a half, or what have you, the idea that people who shouldn't vote, there's enforcement that they shouldn't vote, you're not opposed to that. You're saying they need to know in advance so they don't commit some kind of criminal act because they're just trying to exercise what they believe is their right to vote. Is that accurate?
That's right. What we're seeing are people are just confused. So Amendment 4 passed, giving returning citizens the right to vote. It had some exceptions, though, for voters who had committed violent crimes like sex crimes and murder. And then there also, in the implementation of that, in 2019, the legislature passed SB 7066, which required fines and fees that are accrued by the returning citizens to be paid before they could exercise their right to vote. So there's just a lot of confusion. Not even at every level, voters, supervisors of elections, even state officials, they aren't able to tell definitively whether a voter can vote. And if you can't rely on the state, who can you rely on? to make that determination. So, voting shouldn't be a crime. If someone is voting illegally, obviously that should be stopped and addressed. I don't think anybody's against that. But we feel like the way they're proceeding is putting the cart before the horse, basically jumping to prosecutions and arrests and prosecutions rather than, putting investment in the front end to keep these people out of trouble. It's a broken system, and they're just not addressing the fundamental problem here.
Your statement right after the governor signed that bill that we're talking about said this is a clear power grab meant to take these cases away from impartial state attorneys. What do you mean exactly by that?
Well, what we're seeing is in counties where the state is perceiving the state attorneys to not work to their favor, they're inserting the statewide prosecutor. And, that's where the statewide prosecutor is running into trouble, and the cases are being dismissed by the judges. And that's why the legislature is now trying to expand their purview, their jurisdiction, to make sure that they don't run into that obstacle. So they're basically, it's a power grab.
Is there a way that you can see an organization like yours, other voters' rights groups, can work with what's happening in the Secretary of State's office or what the legislature seems to be pushing forward that you object to?
Yeah, we have to. There's no other option than to work with the environment you're given. But I think, there are people looking at whether this was a constitutional expansion of the statewide prosecutors' powers. I think our group isn't a litigation group. Our group mainly sticks to the policy realm and advocacy at the local level, and then communicating to voters changes that are made and that sort of thing. So we won't litigate, but I know other groups are looking at that.
All voting is local. It's non-profit, that is, and says it's nonpartisan. The group advocates for more access to early voting, vote by mail and drop boxes, and says that they're about protecting the rights of all Florida voters. So we want to offer you more from that interview with Brad Ashwell. What changes would help restore voters' trust in the process from his perspective? You're going to find those answers when you join us on News4Jax Plus. That's our streaming service. It's available on Roku, Apple TV, Fire Stick, Android TV, and Chromecast. Just search News4Jax on your streaming device and download. And then once you're there, you're going to find this interview under the This Week in Jacksonville. We've got our own channel. All right, among our interviews next week, Ashley D. Bell. He's Regional Administrator of the Small Business Administration in the Southeastern United States. This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Cat Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17, and then online at news4jax.com or streaming on News4Jax Plus.
Why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.